somewhere along the winding path of awakening, there comes a moment that changes everything, not with a blinding flash of enlightenment or a chorus of angels, but often with a subtle, unsettling shift. You feel it in your bones before your mind can name it. It might arrive after a seismic spiritual revelation, or perhaps in the slow erosion of your personal identity. What once felt solid suddenly seems fragile, a mirage of certainty dissolving in the light of deeper truth. The familiar becomes foreign. The stories you lived inside for so long, stories about who you are, what matters, what you must pursue, begin to unravel. This is not the rapture we were promised. We are told that awakening will ignite us, will reveal purpose with razor-sharp clarity. But for many, especially the inward travelers, the empaths, the sensitives, it does something else entirely. It strips us. It doesn't inflame purpose. It extinguishes illusion. It scrapes clean the vessel of the self. And what remains is silence. At first, that silence can feel sacred, like stepping out of a burning building into cool, clean air. You breathe differently. Your pace slows. The noise of the world, once deafening, begins to fade into the background. You see through the machinery of your old patterns, the striving, the proving, the endless performing, and feel a kind of freedom. You are no longer playing the role. You are simply here. But slowly that silence deepens. What once felt liberating now begins to feel hollow. Not as a catastrophe, but as a quiet disappearance. You are not grieving anything specific, yet something has been lost. Meaning, once tied to achievement and identity, begins to dissolve. Not all at once, but like light dimming in a room whose switch you never touched. You stopped striving, not from despair, but from a kind of sacred exhaustion, a spiritual weariness, a hollowing out that is not entirely unpleasant, yet strangely unnerving. And then, one day, the whisper begins, "Why do I feel so empty now that I finally see the truth?" This is the paradox no one warns you about. We think awakening will be the beginning of purpose. But for many, it first becomes the end of motivation. And when you look around for answers, few speak of this void. It doesn't trend. It doesn't look poetic or post-worthy. It looks like lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, no longer panicked by not doing enough, but strangely indifferent to doing anything at all. A kind of spiritual apathy that feels both alien and oddly peaceful. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, spoke directly to this threshold. He understood that awakening was not merely the collapse of illusions, but also the crumbling of the egoic structures that held our lives together. He described it as a sacred terrain, a psychological limbo, between the death of the ego and the birth of the true self. This is not dysfunction. It is initiation. It is not failure. It is metamorphosis. This in-between space, this threshold, is terrifying in its stillness, because what powered you before, ambition, approval, fear, desire, has dissolved. The fuel is gone, but the new source of energy has not yet arrived. You are no longer asleep, but you are not yet fully awake into what comes next. This is the chrysalis. The caterpillar has dissolved. The butterfly has not yet emerged. You are goo. In alchemical language, Jung called this the nigredo, the blackening, the first phase of transformation. It is the death of the known. And yet our culture has no language for this space. It calls it laziness, depression, regression. But Jung saw it for what it truly is, the sacred descent, the retreat inward so the soul can rewrite its myth. You didn't lose your spark. You outgrew the fire that once kept you burning. The persona, the mask you wore to be accepted, admired, loved, has begun to disintegrate. not because it was wrong, but because it has served its purpose. You've reached a stage where authenticity demands that the performance end. The goals you once chased now feel hollow. The timelines you once mapped now feel arbitrary. The structures of identity that once defined you, your job title, your relationship roles, even your dreams, begin to fade like old ink on aging paper. You are not confused. You are shedding. And this is where the psychological nuance is vital. The ego does not disappear. It does not die. It simply becomes disoriented. The script it followed has been burned, but no new script has yet emerged. The result is not inertia, but pause, a sacred pause. And this pause is not emptiness. It is preparation. Jung warned that the modern world does everything it can to avoid this phase. We medicate it, bypass it, distract ourselves from it, because it does not look like progress, because it cannot be measured, because it scares us. But if you are here, reading these words, standing in the stillness, listening for something deeper, you have already stepped beyond the threshold. You are not broken. You are being reformed, not by ambition, but by alignment, not by urgency, but by soul. You may feel aimless now, but it's not because you've lost your way. It's because you are shedding the version of yourself that needed a fixed path to feel safe. The self that needed to know in order to move. But the new self, the deeper self, does not move from fear or clarity. It moves from resonance. This is the work of individuation, the lifelong unfolding of becoming who you truly are. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and sometimes that becoming begins in silence, in a kind of holy disorientation. So if you feel extinguished, like the fire has gone out, know this: it hasn't. It is being rekindled from within, not to burn for others, but to warm your own soul. This is not the end of your awakening. It is the beginning of your becoming. It is here, in this quiet between worlds, where most people begin to question everything, not just their outer lives, but their inner compass. The very mechanism of desire begins to malfunction. You wake and feel the weightless drift of a day that asks nothing of you. And you, in turn, feel no urgency to give it anything back. You aren't depressed in the clinical sense. You aren't desperate. You're just still, suspended, detached from the race. You once ran like your life depended on it, and yet that stillness, that sacred vacancy, holds more power than any moment of action before it. You've arrived at a strange and silent edge of your psyche, the place where motivation collapses not from failure, but from the soul's refusal to participate in what no longer feels true. This is the unspoken aftermath of awakening, the quiet fallout no one warns you about. And here's the truth. This phase is not a detour. It is the path. It is the exact place where the false self begins to dissolve, and the true self begins its slow, subtle ascent. Many people stop here. They misinterpret this void as regression. They think, I've lost my passion, my fire, my clarity. Something must be wrong with me. But the only thing that's truly been lost is the false fuel, the adrenaline of proving, the high of approval, the treadmill of becoming. When we wake up, we don't just see through the illusions of the world. We see through the illusions within ourselves. We begin to notice how much of our effort was built on fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being unseen. Fear of being unloved unless we were useful, entertaining, productive, or successful. And when those fears lose their grip, we stop performing. Not because we're lazy, not because we've given up, but because the soul simply cannot pretend anymore. I recall a conversation with a dear friend, someone brilliant, attuned, deeply immersed in the work of Eckhart Tolle, Krishnamurti, and Alan Watts. After enduring her own dark night of the soul, she emerged with crystalline insight. She spoke of the ego's illusions, the unreality of external validation, the futility of clinging to identity. And yet 2 months later, I found her in bed, silent, motionless, eyes open, but distant. "I used to cry about not doing enough," she whispered. "Now I don't care if I do anything at all. I thought awakening would set me on fire. Instead, I feel extinguished." This is the liminal space, the paradoxical void, and this is where Jung's wisdom becomes indispensable. Jung called this process the journey toward individuation, not a spiritual high, but a psychological death. The death of who we thought we were, the slow disintegration of the persona, the carefully constructed identity built from social expectations and internalized roles. He warned that this middle space, where the ego crumbles but the true self has not yet solidified, would be misdiagnosed in modern society. Because our culture is allergic to stillness, it pathologizes rest, it fears depth, and it demands clarity where mystery is the medicine. So when we hit this pause, this soul-imposed stillness, we don't receive guidance, we receive diagnosis. We're told to push through, to get back on track, to find our passion. But what if the track itself is gone because the map was never ours to begin with? This silence is not empty. It is formative. It is where the unconscious begins to stir, not as a monster in the depths, but as the ancient voice of what is real. Here in this void, your soul begins its sacred revolt. It stops saying yes to what depletes it. It refuses the narratives that were imposed upon it. It begins rejecting not just the lies you were told, but the ones you told yourself in order to survive. Your system, body, mind, and spirit, begins purging everything untrue. That might mean a career that looked great on paper but fed your insecurity, or a relationship that kept you feeling needed, but never truly seen. It might mean letting go of ambitions that were never yours, or even spiritual practices that once brought comfort, but now feel hollow. This purification process can feel like a dismantling, because it is, but it is also liberation. There is no quick fix here, no productivity hack for the soul. What's required now is presence, listening, and perhaps, most painfully, patience, because the self, the real self, does not arrive like a thunderclap. It emerges like a whisper, and you must become still enough to hear it. The ego wants direction. It wants a new script, a goal, a 5-step plan. But the self, it does not shout. It does not demand. It waits. And in that waiting, something begins to shift. Not a roaring motivation, but a gentle impulse, a feeling, a knowing, a faint sense of what no longer resonates and what quietly, inexplicably does. This is the difference between ego drive and soul pull. The ego pushes, the soul invites. And while this invitation may come with no guarantee, no certainty, and no applause, it comes with resonance. And that resonance is your new compass, that soft yes in your gut, that subtle expansion in your chest, that quiet, this feels right, even when it makes no logical sense. It's not the return of motivation, it's the beginning of something deeper, devotion. Devotion not to outcomes, but to truth, not to performance, but to presence, not to success, but to soul. And here's what few understand. Once the ego steps back, and the soul steps forward, what once felt like failure begins to reveal itself as freedom. You stop moving from fear, and you begin moving from alignment. You still act. You still create. But now your energy flows from a different source. One that does not burn out. One that does not depend on results. One that is sustainable because it is real. The self is not here to perform. It is here to express. And it will not force. It will only unfold. So if you are here, in this strange space where everything has quieted and nothing compels you, know this: you are not broken. You are becoming, and though the world cannot see it, something ancient within you is being rewritten, not by effort, but by surrender. You are not losing your fire. You are remembering the source of your light. There is a moment, though you may not even recognize it at first, when the silence begins to shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but almost imperceptibly, like the way dawn leaks into a room before you realize night has ended. After what feels like an eternity in stillness, a different kind of energy begins to stir, not the urgency of the old self, but the hum of something quieter, deeper. It doesn't feel like ambition. It doesn't flash like inspiration. It feels like a subtle tug from within, a curiosity, a gentle interest, a whisper. Move here. You don't know why. You don't know where it leads, but you feel it. That's resonance. That is the soul speaking in the only language it knows. Feeling. This is the return, but not to who you were. It is a return to who you've always been underneath. And this return has no fanfare. It often begins with small acts. You find yourself picking up the pen again, not to publish, but just to write. You go for a walk not to reach a destination, but because the air feels good. You sit in stillness, not for productivity, but because something in you wants to listen again. The soul's movement is not a sprint. It is not a project. It is a presence. And presence can feel foreign when you've lived your life performing. But now, performance is impossible. The mask has been burned. The scripts no longer make sense. You couldn't fake it again if you tried. This is where individuation begins to take form, not as a theory, but as a lived reality. Jung taught that individuation is the process by which the ego becomes integrated into the totality of the psyche. It is the journey from fragmentation to wholeness, not perfection. Wholeness. And wholeness includes the dark, the slow, the unsure, the in-between. Most of the world misses this phase entirely. Many awaken briefly and then run back to the comfort of ego structures. They rebuild a spiritual identity, adopt a new script, but still live from the same performance, just dressed in different robes. Others fall into the trap of spiritual bypassing. They speak of detachment, illusion, oneness, but use it to avoid the painful work of embodiment. But the true path of awakening is not upward. It is downward, inward, deeper. It is not escape. It is integration. The self is not interested in your appearance of enlightenment. It is interested in your embodiment of truth. And embodiment requires that you descend into the body, into your emotions, into your unmet needs, your quiet longings, your hidden fears. You don't transcend these. You honor them. You make space for them, because they too are parts of your wholeness. This descent is why awakening often leads not to action, but to stillness, because the self must become the new foundation. And that foundation is not built in a day. It is built through lived experience, through sitting with discomfort, through listening to inner truth, through refusing to abandon yourself again. Slowly, the chaos of the world no longer dictates your rhythm. The old metrics, achievement, validation, comparison, lose their weight. You are no longer trying to catch up with anyone. You are no longer measuring your worth by productivity. Instead, you begin to tune into a different source of energy altogether, one that doesn't roar, it hums. This new energy often emerges as devotion, not devotion in a religious sense, but in a sacred one, a devotion to alignment, to what feels true, to what brings you alive. Not in a fleeting way, but in a grounded, honest way. You might still create, you might still work, you might still build, but now, you do it not from pressure but from presence, not from lack but from fullness. And that shift changes everything. You're no longer trying to prove your worth. You're expressing it. You're no longer chasing success. You're responding to inner guidance. You're no longer burning yourself out to be enough. You are listening to what feels real, and that listening fuels you. Sometimes this inner shift results in outer changes. You may leave a job and a relationship, move to a different place, not because you are running, but because what no longer aligns begins to feel unbearable. And what does align, no matter how uncertain, begins to glow. Other times, the outer changes are subtle. You stay where you are, but relate to it differently. You stop overgiving. You start speaking honestly. You say no when you mean no. You rest when you are tired, even if the world calls you lazy. You become loyal to your inner world more than your outer performance. This is the self beginning to lead. Quietly, naturally, without fanfare, without the ego's constant need for attention. And from this place, life begins to feel like a dialogue again. Not a monologue where you're screaming into a void, but a conversation with something greater, something unseen but deeply felt. You begin to trust signs, synchronicities, dreams, instincts. You begin to follow the trail of resonance like breadcrumbs in the dark. And eventually something beautiful happens. Your life starts to reassemble itself. But it's not a return to what was. It's a recreation, a soul-constructed rhythm that feels deeply personal, intimate, yours. Jung called this living a symbolic life, a life not ruled by ego or convention, but by inner truth. In this life, every choice is a reflection of alignment. Every moment is a chance to express the real, rather than perform the expected. You still face fear, doubt still visits, fatigue is still human, but the difference now is presence. You're not abandoning yourself when these things arrive. You're witnessing them. You're responding from the ground of being, not the chaos of performance. This is the new foundation, and it is quiet, unshakable, sacred. By now, something within you has begun to remember. Not in the way we recall facts, but in the way the soul recognizes home. The emptiness you once mistook for apathy, you now understand as space. The stillness you feared was stagnation. You now honor as the womb of truth. What once felt like a breakdown, you now recognize as a breakthrough, but of a different kind. One that isn't marked by fireworks, but by the return of your own quiet pulse. This is what it means to live soul first. And it doesn't look like what the world sells as enlightenment. It looks like simplicity. It looks like boundaries that protect your energy. It looks like listening more than speaking, resting more than proving. It looks like creating not because you have to, but because you can't not. The self is no longer an ideal. It is a compass. When the soul begins to lead, you don't abandon the world. You inhabit it, fully, authentically, from within. You no longer walk around your truth, afraid it will be too much or too strange or too quiet. You stand inside it and let the world adjust to you. You begin saying no without guilt. You begin saying yes without fear. You let go of timelines and you embrace timing. You stop forcing clarity and you begin trusting emergence. This is the sacred reversal. Jung called it enantiodromia, the turning of one extreme into its opposite. The striving ego collapses. The waiting soul rises. You no longer hustle toward fulfillment. You become it. And slowly, the landscape of your life begins to shift. Not all at once, but organically. Your relationships deepen or dissolve, not from conflict, but from honesty. Your work becomes either more aligned or increasingly intolerable. You're no longer trying to be someone. You're becoming who you already are. You start asking different questions. Not, what should I do? But what wants to move through me? Not, how do I get ahead? But what is asking to be honored right now? Not, what will make them love me? But what brings me closer to self-respect? And though the answers may come slowly, they come in the form of nudges, symbols, gut feelings, dreams, encounters. Life becomes less a task and more a collaboration. This is the symbolic life Jung spoke of. A life not just lived, but felt. A life guided not by trends or titles, but by resonance. And in this life, the mundane becomes holy. Making a cup of tea, tending your body, sitting in silence, none of it is wasted. Everything becomes an expression of who you are becoming. And here lies the paradox. Living this way may look unremarkable on the surface. It may not make sense to others. It may not garner applause. But internally, it is the most radical life you can live. One free from performance. One anchored in truth. One rooted in peace. You may still grieve your old self sometimes. You may still miss the high of ambition or the comfort of certainty. But now you know. Those things were never the source of your worth. They were just echoes of the mask. The soul doesn't chase, it calls. And that call, quiet, persistent, unwavering, will guide you forward, step by step, breath by breath, not toward perfection, but toward wholeness. So if you find yourself in that strange middle space, post-awakening, pre-clarity, know that you are not lost. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are in metamorphosis. And while the world may not recognize it, your soul does. It has been waiting for this moment, waiting for you to stop, to listen, to come home. Because when the self begins to lead, you no longer ask, "Am I enough?" You begin asking, "What feels true?" And that one question changes everything. So if this message stirred something in you, if it mirrored your experience, your ache, your becoming, trust that. You are not alone in this silence. You are not the only one dissolving, not the only one reforming. You are part of a quiet revolution, one soul at a time, waking up not to perform, but to embody, not to dominate life, but to dance with it. And if someone you love is walking this path, tired, unsure, still in the silence, share this with them. Let them know the stillness is not failure. It is formation, because one day something will move within them. And they'll rise, not with noise, but with knowing, not with urgency, but with presence. And that truly is the beginning of everything real. Welcome home.